Thank you so much for coming and chatting with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to
Yes,
be here.
this is awesome. Well, yes, I'm Katie Fincher. I'm a pelvic health physical therapist here at Limitless Pelvic Health. Jamie, will you please introduce yourself and tell us who you are, what you do, and yeah, start there.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Jamie Azar. I'm a certified relationship and intimacy coach and owner of Erotic Expressions, where I give people a non-judgmental, confidential, and safe space to turn off shame and turn pleasure on and redefine intimacy, relationships, and sex and sexuality on their own terms.
Oh,
So
I
I'm
love
excited
this.
to talk with you today. Excited to be here, and
Yes.
thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. This is going to be a great conversation. So tell us a little bit about your background and what led you into pursuing sex coaching and kind of even just like that process of your education and kind of like, just your story as to how you got to where you are.
Absolutely. I'm a former high school English teacher of 13 years, so my background is in education. I've taught abroad, mentoring thousands of people, and educating has just been a passion of mine
Yeah.
for as long as I can remember. And I just, after 13 years, was growing tired of where I was and what I was doing, and felt a little stifled by not only the system, but working a 9 to 5, and was just seeking more creativity and passion and pleasure in my life. And
Yeah.
so started doing some research and was lucky enough to find a program developed by Moshumi Ghost, who's a marriage family therapist, called the Pleasure Psychology and Sexology Certification Program, founded by Los Angeles Sex Therapy. And I didn't even know this type of thing existed, where you could be a sex coach and relationship coach
Yeah.
and support people in living a more pleasure-centric life. And that just resonated with what I wanted to do. And so that's kind of when I took the leap into this field. And here I am
Yes.
today. And I love what I do, and I love who I work with. And I just haven't felt more aligned with my own passion and purpose and pleasure. So it's great alignment, and I'm just honored to be able to do what I do and work with the people that I do, and be let into their lives and journeys as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a big deal when you find where your passions and like your skills kind of like align.
Yeah.
And you can kind of make that bridge. And then, like you said, it's just like helping other people find that really pleasure and freedom again. So,
Absolutely.
which is huge.
Absolutely.
Well, tell us kind of what populations and what clients you typically work with, and kind of maybe some of your like essentially who your ideal client is.
Yeah, so I work with both singles and couples plus, and partners of all relationship styles and structures, constellations, all sexualities, genders, races, ethnicities. I work with people who really a wide variety of issues. For singles, maybe trying to navigate the dating world and embrace singlehood and find confidence and empowerment in their identities
Yeah.
and their purposes in life. Some people who are going through divorces or breakups and trying to rediscover themselves and reestablish themselves in life. I've helped couples through divorces and conscious uncoupling. I've worked with women who have never experienced an orgasm before and are
Yep.
looking to develop more of a relationship with their body and pleasure. I work with couples who have been together for 20 years and
Yes.
are just looking to expand their sex life, and who might be empty nesters and looking to start a new chapter in their life. I've worked with couples primarily on communication, conflict resolution, men with sexual difficulties or dysfunction, to name a few. So
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like a whole wide variety.
Yeah.
You serve a very wide and broad population.
I
You serve pretty much
do.
everyone.
I
It
do. I
sounds like.
love it. I love it. And in terms of an ideal client for me, it's someone who has a growth mindset and who's ready to show up and lean into the work, because as we know, right, like especially when it comes to sex and sexuality, there's a lot of shame
Yes.
and a lot of unlearning that has to go into this process of rediscovery and expansion.
Mhm.
And that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of sitting through uncomfortable
Yes.
feelings. And people, not everyone is ready for that, but the
Yeah.
people who are, I find, have the most success, and I enjoy working with the most. So come see me if this is if this is resonating with you.
Absolutely. Gosh, and that makes so much sense. And even from my perspective as a pelvic health PT, it's like people have to be ready, to do some of that work too, like, and to have the most success, I should say.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, it's okay if you're not there right now, like, whenever that is, like, we're here.
Yes, absolutely.
We're available.
Absolutely.
Tell me kind of, because you mentioned your education backgrounds, prior to pursuing what you're doing now. So tell us what role education plays in your work, and like, how do you help clients reframe their understanding of sexuality and sexual health in general?
Great question. Thanks for asking. Education is pivotal and essential to what I do, given the lack of sex education in the United States, a comprehensive sex education.
Yes.
And so people come in with either just an ignorance around sexual health and wellness, something they maybe have never thought about, misinformation, myths, social and cultural scripts that are heteronormative or limiting, or just do not encompass the full spectrum of our identities and the way we express ourselves sexually and relationally. So education is integral to the process of unlearning. I think it's one of the first places I start with my clients is, if we are talking about sex, what is your definition of sex and pleasure? And how can we start redefining sex beyond penetration and reproduction and focus on pleasure and consent and boundaries and communication and the art of connection, right?
Yes.
And being vulnerable and all of these other things that don't get discussed, especially now when reproductive rights and our LGBTQIA community and marginalized communities are under attack. And we know that now more than ever, we need comprehensive sex education. And, again, it's a process of unlearning and relearning, and we don't always have models for that. Especially, right, like the media and our lack of education. And so people need support. People need support in the rebuilding of their foundations of what they want their pleasure to look like, healthy sex life, healthy relationships on their own terms.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned the definition of sex, right? So like when we as a culture, just normally you hear the word sex, what does the culture kind of define sex as? And then how can we go beyond that?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think traditionally we think of sex in a very heteronormative way, penetration, penis and vagina, right? We've got this idea of the escalator, a very predictable sequence of events, right? That we probably know starts with kissing, touching, fondling, right? Oral, then we know the rest of the way. And so I think just getting people to recognize that this is a social and cultural script. It's what we see in the media, right? It's like relates to these ideas of perfectionism we may have, expectations of how we should be performing, how our partners should be performing, right? And then we just start shoulding all over our sex lives.
I love that quote
right?
so much.
I love that too. And so, just getting people to think about, okay, this is one definition. This is one way that we understand it, right? And so what are some ways that we can think about sex as something that brings us pleasure and start expanding this definition?
Totally.
And for really, that's different for everyone, depending on their definition and how they want to understand their pleasure, what their interests and preferences are. And that changes, right, too. That can be fluid for people across time and across different seasons of our lives.
Totally.
So also giving ourselves permission to allow our definitions of pleasure to change and our needs or preferences, desires, relationship interests, all of it.
Yeah.
We are not necessarily static and stagnant beings, and neither are our expressions of ourselves and sexuality. So giving ourselves permission to be fluid and dynamic, and learn. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Explore, learn, and experience new things.
Yes. And
That's
have
a big
these
deal.
conversations, right? Like the information's out there. Just get curious, whether it's listening to podcasts, reading books, talking to friends, talking to a professional, right? Any of these could be great steps to starting to expand that definition of sex.
Sure. I think that when it comes to, the definition of sex, or just, how people either don't talk about sex, or, are not exposed to some of these resources, has a lot to do with shame and discomfort, surrounding, whether it's their upbringing, whether it's their understanding or lack thereof, when discussing sex, and even pelvic health conditions and some of those types of things. So how do you approach those conversations with individuals who may have that kind of foundation of just a lot of shame and a lot of, guilt surrounding maybe their past, or, what's happened?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. And I think the first step is just acknowledging it. Acknowledging it with gentle compassion and curiosity is key. And accepting, firstly, that it's there and that it exists. And, for me with my clients, I might spend some time in that space before trying to heal it, confronting it, maybe getting curious about what it feels like somatically, how it shows up in their body.
Sure.
And then we can start getting curious around, okay, what beliefs or stories or narratives, right, might be attached to those feelings of shame. And then we can work on reframing, right, and maybe some cognitive behavioral shifts and relearning. And again, there's a huge journey in self-compassion and self-love through that, right? And that's kind of where the healing starts.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And it is a journey, but it starts with self and it starts with acknowledgement. And I think that compassion and curiosity is key in that healing process too.
No, that's huge. I mean, you can't heal from anything until you've really just looked at it, and acknowledge that it is present. And it's hey, how do we, move on from there? And that sounds like that's part of what you do, is help guide people through that process of understanding, what to do next if you feel like there's something more out there.
Right. And understanding, again, where it comes from can be just really helpful. I mean, we're bombarded, again, with all these social and cultural scripts and expectations, lack of education, religious trauma or upbringing, purity culture. I mean, there's a lot that can go into that. And so
we've had conversations about that.
Oh yeah. Just digging in and getting curious. That's the work, but it can be so exciting when that starts moving for people and opening up and healing.
Yes.
Right. And that's the beauty in the journey.
Yes.
Too,
I love that. So
witnessing
much.
Those shifts.
Oh, for sure. Talk to me a little bit about some common misconceptions or ideas surrounding sex that people think make them not normal.
Yeah.
Or again, kind of contribute to some of that shame or some of those things that are just not true, that we can kind of clear up for the people listening. Just when it comes to anything surrounding sex, but just things that are just oh, that's actually not true. You shouldn't expect this to happen, or we should expect this to happen.
Yeah, I love that question. I just did a live the other day on this, and I talked about 5 myths that hijack our pleasure. I think we kind of...
I love this. Yeah. Okay, let's go through them.
We kind of already addressed one, I think, is that more limited definition of sex as penetration. But I think one that's coming up now is just this misunderstanding about desire. And I think people spend a lot of time worrying about the mismatched desires in their relationships, their lack of desire for sex, maybe having too much desire for it, thinking they don't, they're broken because they don't want sex enough, maybe feeling like they're unwanted or unlovable because their partner doesn't want them enough. And people just... again, we have this misconception about this spontaneous desire that emerges or that everyone should have, right? Because of the movies and these social cultural scripts, right?
Yeah.
We know that all of these desire imperatives about the way we fall in love with someone spontaneously and that spark, or that spontaneous desire we experience in the moment and we're ready to have sex with someone. Not everyone operates right like that. And some people are more responsive in their desire, and some people need to feel emotional connection before wanting to have sex with someone, right? There's, a spectrum of the way that people experience desire. And one thing I've learned from Emily Nagoski's Come As You Are and her other book, Come Together, too, is that desire is less important than pleasure, really. I mean, desire, the root of it is a wanting, is a longing, right?
Yes.
Which can be frustrating if we're not getting what we want. And if we're focusing more on pleasure, which is a liking, which is a feeling good, which is enjoying what is in the moment, I think that can be a big shift for people. And also recognizing that it's unlikely that we're going to want sex at the exact same time as our partners, right?
Yes.
It's unlikely that we're going to be like turned on at the same time or feeling desire at the same
Or having an
time
orgasm
or
at the
having an
same-
orgasm at the same time, right? Like
Yeah.
just kind of normalizing variability in desire, in the frequency at which we have sex. And again, that having more sex doesn't necessarily mean it's better.
Or having more pleasure.
Or having more pleasure, right? So
Mhm.
again, just kind of unpacking some of these imperatives and these myths around like how much sex we should be having, how we should be having it, when we should be having it, I think is a great place for people to start. Again, focusing on pleasure and recognizing too that great sex takes work, right? One of those other myths is that
That's
like
big.
sex should be spontaneous and effortless. And it's not like that, right? Great sex takes effort, it takes work, and it takes intention and
Yes.
creativity, and just recognizing that it's okay if we put effort into our sex lives.
Yes, it absolutely is okay.
Yes.
We need to.
Exactly.
Like you said, because it's like, you know, you could be having sex and like, and if pleasure is not a big focus of that, you know, you're not going to be enjoying that. And then over time that can lead to a lack of desire
Right.
because again, you're doing something that your body isn't craving
Mhm.
because it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if we invest, you know, the time, the effort into understanding and educating ourselves as to what feels good for us, and then how can we communicate that,
Yes.
you know, with our significant others and people who we are interacting with day to day. I think that that's a big deal.
Absolutely. We know that starts with self too, right? Like
Yes.
you don't have to be in a relationship even to experience that. Like,
Mhm.
you know, I love like encouraging people to explore their own bodies, explore their own pleasure
Yeah.
through self-touch. Again, there's a lot of shame around that, but
Totally.
you know, our pleasure starts with ourselves. And like you said, how can we communicate with someone else if we don't know first?
Yes.
And so just as important to have a sexual relationship and understanding of ourselves and embrace that as totally healthy,
Yes.
totally amazing, and can be just as satisfying, even if you aren't with a partner in a relationship.
Yeah.
Can certainly own your pleasure.
Yes.
Encourage you to do that.
Encourage, yeah, seriously. I was having a conversation with my husband last night, and we were just talking through, like, you know, what are some of the common like things that men struggle with or that women struggle with, and like, you know, all those kinds of things. And my husband brought up the point of like, you know, I just don't think people study themselves enough, you know, to know what they enjoy, to know what they want, and how to communicate that, you know, to their significant other. So that makes that's a good point of just like, yeah, understanding how that impacts us as individuals first.
Oh, 100%.
And then moving from there.
100%. And there's a lot of pressure on men just as equally. I mean, the
Yeah.
pressure permeates all people of all genders and,
Yes.
you know, sexualities too, with these social and cultural scripts too. So that's something I've learned as well is, you know, the pressure doesn't discriminate against,
Yeah.
you know, how it affects people's senses of self and, you know, their pressure around their needs, thinking they need to perform a certain way.
Sure.
And
Yep.
yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about specifically to men, kind of the things that you've seen that they tend to wrestle with a little bit more as it pertains to sexuality and working through some of those pieces?
Yes. The men that I've worked with have generally struggled with early ejaculation
Yeah.
or maintaining an erection,
Mhm.
erectile variability, for example. And with those folks, I've noticed they experience a lot of pressure around their performance in general.
Yeah.
How long they can maintain an erection, if they can get one. A lot of pressure what happens when I lose an erection. There's a lot of pressure sometimes coming from partners around that as well,
Sure.
of wanting their male partner or penis owner to be erect longer or be able to last longer. And so just, yeah, there's a lot of pressure around erections and performance,
Sure.
and that being tied to masculinity and ability, and it's tough for a lot of the men that I've worked with. And so firstly, just addressing again that there are just these unreasonable expectations that men should be walking around with raging hard-ons all the time and ready to
Yes.
go.
Right.
And that isn't a reasonable expectation. Our bodies do what they want to do sometimes and don't always
Yeah.
operate the way that we want them to, and that's totally okay.
Mhm.
And to normalize like a soft penis and knowing that that's okay too. And for men, just normalizing erectile variability is
Yes.
huge and alleviates so much pressure for them, and at least initially. And like, it's okay for there to be variability. And there are still other ways that we can play outside of having an erection. And again, genitalia and penetration and orgasm do not have to be a part of your sexual equations if you don't want them to be. And they don't necessarily have to be constants.
Or even the focus of them.
Or even the focus. You got it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a big one that I've noticed, even, working with some of the men that I've seen as well, is just that the performance anxiety surrounding, some of those things, and normalizing, like, again, like you said, this variability, and that we have a physiological body that responds to many factors that some you don't have as much control over. And that's okay. And being able to give people the tools to understand education, right? Those pieces, and then being able to move forward, with confidence on how to address, some of those pieces, which is huge.
Yeah.
I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. We discussed desire and how that sometimes can be, a discrepancy in a relationship, or, just like the expectation of society kind of gives this idea of spontaneous desire being what you should have when it comes to sex and intimacy. So will you walk us through kind of what spontaneous desire is, what responsive desire is, and then even context and how context of a situation can play a role in some of those things?
Sure. So spontaneous desire is generally someone will think about sex and want it, right? That desire will emerge. So the mental want comes first and the desire immediately after, and then generally a readiness to engage. And that's generally the type of spontaneous desire we see in the movies and film, like in porn, for example, a lot of the times. That's also tied up again in those desire imperatives when we first meet the person. There's that spark. Responsive desire is a little different in the sense that the person will generally need to respond to some kind of context, variable, environment, emotional situation to feel desire. So the mental want comes after the engagement or response to something, right? For some people, they might need, for example, some kind of transition activity or ritual like massaging or a bathing ritual, right? Or self-touch, or even some kind of mindful movement or meditation or eye gazing with a partner. They might need some visual stimuli like watching some porn or listening to erotica. They might need to be engaged, for example, in some cuddling with a partner or hugging or kissing. And then the mental want comes and says, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I do desire this. This is nice. I am into this.
Yes.
So it just emerges a little bit differently than spontaneous desire. And we're not necessarily one or the other. We can have a combination of both.
Sure.
And it certainly can change over time as well. And so just recognizing as well that it can be different for different people. And I think understanding how our desire works and how our partner's desires work, that can help us to gain more awareness and kind of ownership over them, and how we can use that awareness to experience more pleasure.
Yes.
And kind of coordinate with our partners in ways that work for both of us.
Yes.
Or however many people are in the relationship. Yeah.
When it comes to kind of, again, communication and discussing those things with your partner or partners, like, what does that look like? What are kind of some of the first steps that you encourage someone or help people work through to when it comes to being able to even talk about some of this stuff if it hasn't really been the norm in a relationship?
Yeah, good question. Firstly, the education piece, like, okay, here are the different types of desire. Which one kind of resonates with you folks? How do you think yours works? And then, okay, now that we have this information, initiation plays a huge role with couples, I find. That is a huge piece, especially for people, the partners with more responsive desire. I find that if the initiation maybe isn't right for them, again, if that context isn't right, like I know Emily Nagoski uses the idea of tickling, right? Where like, if like in one context, like if you're fighting with your partner and your partner starts tickling you, you're probably going to want to like punch them
Yes.
or yell at them, right? But maybe if it's a more playful, erotic situation, right? We've already kind of, you're in the mood, like someone starts tickling you, like it feels a little more pleasurable and like it's fun. And like, you're like, okay, now we're
Yes.
play wrestling. Like, okay, whatever. Now we're in whatever mode, like pleasure play mode.
Yes.
So I think, again, context is key. And talking about with your partner, how do you like to initiate? How do you want your partner to initiate? Having conversations around that. I do find that with a lot of my responsive folks, they appreciate verbalization from the partner who might be a little more spontaneous before initiating even. Like, again, I think consent gets sometimes lost in long-term relationships. It can look obviously different with a long-term partner, but a lot of more responsive partners appreciate their partners asking or inquiring or giving them a verbal compliment, like before touching, for example. So again, just thinking about how to use initiation that works with your partner. And again, that can change day to day, moment to moment. And having alternatives in those moments if we aren't into what our offer, like the partner's initiation or bid for connection is, right? Like maybe your partner is inquiring or initiating for some kind of intimacy or sex. And for you, that doesn't sound great, but maybe you could be open to some cuddling or some hand holding or kissing, for example, or maybe a shower together. So I think when it comes to desire too, allowing our openness to emerge, to be open to a possible encounter, especially with people that responsive desire. If someone is initiated, say, hey, are you open to maybe having sex or some playtime right now in this moment? No, but you know what? I might be open to that in a little bit after I've done X, Y, and Z. So again, taking into account that we don't necessarily have to be ready for sex right when our partner initiates, and allowing our openness and again, that more responsive desire to emerge on our time when we're ready after we've had some time to think about, could I be open to this?
Yes.
What might I need before this? And in what way, if I'm not into option A, maybe I'm going to offer option B.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think like you said, it's like on your own time and feeling comfortable enough in your relationship for both partners to be okay with that. Right?
Yes.
You know, when it comes to, pressuring or feeling pressure to perform or pressure to do something, that's only going to create obligation. It's only going to create tension. We don't want that, when it comes to those bids for connection.
100%.
And I think when it comes to even just the sexual response cycle, it's like, the interest, then the desire, and then we have the arousal, right? Like the actual physical response of our bodies, what happens. That's what I deal a lot with, in my population is like understanding, what are these physical changes that happen in our bodies? And if one or something's not happening the way that you expect it to, like let's explore, some of these other, mind body pieces that are contributing, to that. So can you speak a little bit into kind of the role or kind of, arousal itself, kind of like, what does that even mean? And even, like the differences and similarities between like the clitoris, the penis, and how, we can kind of understand that from a physical perspective.
Yeah. So I think it might start with a sense of desire, that wanting, that longing, and then arousal. For me, I think of it as more of a physiological experience, right? We might feel more of our heart racing, like more blood flow to our genitalia, a little pulsing or throbbing, maybe even an engorging, for example, of the vulva, of the vulvar tissue. Similarly to a man, heart racing, right? Like blood rushing to his genitalia, hardening, leading to erection. So more physiological.
Yes.
And again, I kind of like side note here, I feel like we should address is arousal non-concordance as well, because I think that's a really important piece to note is that you can experience a non-concordance in your mental
Yes.
arousal and your physiological arousal, right? Like we can be showing physiological signs of arousal, like an erection or engorged labia or a wet vagina,
Yep.
right? But mentally, we may not be aroused at all,
Yep.
or vice versa
Totally.
might happen. And so, yeah, just acknowledging that arousal isn't necessarily as straightforward as we think either.
Yes, I love that. Bringing that point. That's important.
So, desire, arousal, and yes, I mean, in terms of similarities between a male penis and vulva, like I would say the clitoris is kind of the equivalent to the glans or the head of the penis, and we know
Definitely.
that the clitoris is our pleasurable zone of over 10,281 nerve endings. I believe the number is
wild.
now. It's really, but also recognizing, like I saw an interesting post too about, many people say like the clitoris is purely solely designed for pleasure, and that is so true, but it also very much contributes to our mental health. And we know that masturbation and showing our clitoris love can very much contribute to decreases in depression and anxiety, and those neurochemicals and neurohormones that are released can be very healing and can really help turn off our defense systems, right, of panic and fear and rage and grief, and help us tap more into play and care and lust.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, and again, pleasure exists beyond our genitalia, but yeah, there's tons of fun to be had too with our amazing clitoris.
Oh, totally.
Vulva owners with a clitoris.
Yes. I remember the first time that I learned that the clitoris like gets an erection.
Yeah.
And I was like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, are you serious?
Yeah.
But then you look at the anatomy and the structure of a penis and a clitoris, and it's like, wow, these things look very similar in structure. It's just location, size, and where everything fits in the pelvis. But understanding, just even your anatomy.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And knowing about that is humongous. And then I would love for you to touch, like you said, pleasure exists beyond the genitalia. I talk to my patients often about how your brain truly is your biggest sex organ, and how that contributes to all of what we're talking about. So can you talk about kind of what that looks like for a lot of people and kind of how you address that?
Yeah, 100%. And I love the way you said that your brain is your biggest sex organ. And I would 100% agree. And we know that if our brain is not on board with our body, then we're most likely probably not experiencing pleasure, right? We might be experiencing that disembodiment, more of that performance anxiety. And so a lot of, I think the work does start in just helping clients align the mind-body connection. For me, that's working on somatics with folks and practicing mindfulness and just cultivating that self-awareness. Doing a lot of kind of mindful pleasure mapping, again, outside of necessarily having to masturbate or be engaged with your genitalia, but just taking a more mindful approach to touching your body in different ways and taking note of different erogenous zones or what feels good, or maybe even doing that in a very neutral way of just doing it and not ascribing a good or bad feeling to it, but just a noticing, a
even a
neutral
sexual
noticing.
context to it, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like just like you mentioned, just like being present with your senses and understanding, like, hey, I get to understand more of what my body does enjoy and what it doesn't. Like, it doesn't have to be necessarily all sexual in context.
Yeah, and recognizing that pleasure exists beyond the bedroom. I mean, a lot with my folks who, don't know what feels good to them. Let's start outside the bedroom. Like, pleasure is anything literally that feels good to you. It could be taking that, which for me it is, that first sip of coffee in the morning, right? Like, and it's a whole experience for me, right? I'm taking in the sound of it brewing. I'm taking in like the smell of it, like the color of it when I add the coffee to my cream, and it has to be the perfect color, right? Like it is that, like I'm particular, but that's part of like it's a ritual for me, right? It's part of my pleasure. And so that's something I look forward to, and it's something I savor. And I think savoring can be, right, like you're talking about, is just in that moment of noticing and taking in the body, and what does this feel like in my body? What sensations am I noticing, right? And how can I then experience more of this and translate that presence and that pleasure in the bedroom? But yeah, it's a practice and it's an art, right? And it takes an embodiment,
Definitely.
I think, right? And a groundedness in our bodies to notice, and a slowing down,
Our
right?
society's not designed for that.
Rest and pleasure is a form of resistance. I'm a firm believer
love
in
that so much.
And I think it's so crucial and so key. And we should be unapologetic about taking rest, and unapologetic and unabashedly shameless for prioritizing our pleasure, because those are the keys to, I think, true health and wellness. And we need more of that. We need more of that in our lives, if you ask me.
We totally do. I 100% agree. Oh my goodness. That could be a whole nother conversation.
A whole nother conversation.
Well, Jamie, tell us how we can get in touch with you and where people can find you and what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the easiest way, to be honest, is just follow me on Instagram at Erotic Expressions EDU.
There you go.
And go to my link tree. That's pretty much my hub. You can find my website. You can find my Substack. Subscribe to my newsletter if you would, and you can just—
I do. It's really good.
Thank you. Just follow me. I'm always hosting some kind of workshop or offering. I love collaborating, and I offer a book club as well, twice a month, and we'll be starting a new read, title to be determined and voted on tomorrow with my group. But would love to have you here. And or just reach out if something I said today resonated with you, and or if you're curious to have a conversation, if you're single or in a relationship and looking to explore your relationship with yourself or each other, and discover how you can live a more pleasure-centric and authentic life.
Love that. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. What a blast.
This is so fun.
So fun.
We'll have to do it again sometime.
I'm down.
Perfect.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Jamie.
so much, Katie. Talk to you soon.
Of course.